Well, thank you for joining us again for this next episode of the HR and CQ show. Today we have Charlotte and Sam joining us as our guests today. So Sam owns a company called Braver Leaders, and Charlotte owns a business called The Wellness Theory. And together they run a wellbeing leaders networking event here in Dubai. So we decided that we'd actually bring them in together and talk about leadership and wellness, because we think the two things really fit positively and well together.
Yeah, and they complement with the HR and the cultural intelligence aspects that we talk about, because you need to be a leader to be in HR, but also you're dealing with leaders when you're in HR, and wellness is one of the big topics. I mean, should we talk about the elephant in the room of well washing and get that completely out of the way?
Is there a way to get it completely out of the way? I wish. I think we're turning a corner, slowly but surely, across the globe, but particularly in this region as well, where people are thinking more systemically. And that's really what it is, kind of what we're up to. And one of the reasons why we've kind of joined forces is because we understand that well-being is impacted through systemic change. And I think that's where the mindset of leaders needs a bit of a shift, so that things like well washing can't then be continued, right? At least not with any sense of integrity. That's the aim of the game, at least.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to be, as you say, it seems to be turning a bit of a corner. I think that people are starting to see it as a smart business decision, aren't they? Which is fairly crucial. So, I just want to say well done on getting our names, businesses and combined businesses out as well. Like,
that's why as soon as I did it, I managed to fumble the next part of what I wanted to say.
The easy part was fumbled.
yeah, because I was like, phew, I did that well.
Very well.
But so tell us a bit more then about what you believe, Sam, is the role of leaders within the organisation in terms of shaping well-being, like within the organisation. Because for me, they have a key role, but you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the key roles of a leader nowadays is to actually create space and hold space, right? And so one of the things that I know that Charlotte sees and I see a lot of is this people kind of dictating what needs to be done, when in reality, what we need to start looking at now is how do we co-create? Right? So there's this ability to say, what is it that you all need? What do you need? Because everyone's got such diverse needs now, haven't they? And I think that's where well washing will take a back seat, when we can actually consider the needs of the many and hold space for that, rather than I know all the answers. Sorry, what was the question? So yeah, that's where the role I see there is the rather than I'm standing at the front, I've got all of the answers, follow me quickly. It's what do we need? I'm willing to step back and actually take some time here and figure that out together, if that makes sense.
So how are you seeing that in terms of Dubai as a region? Because there is a lot of organisations that are led by a dominant culture of hierarchy, whereas like what the leader says goes. So, how do you apply what you've just said then to a region like Dubai? I don't know who wants to take that.
I think there's obviously the traditional approach right here, and sometimes it's like trying to storm the castle when you're trying to talk about these subjects. But I do think that we have multiple entry points. Ultimately, yes, I think leaders, the buck stops with the leaders, senior leadership teams. But I do think we can affect change at grassroots and that messy middle that we like to call it, where we do have people, we have HR, we have other people that are passionate about well-being, but also about just caring about their people, regardless of their role. And I think we sometimes underestimate how much change we can really have, and in self-leadership, rather than just leadership by position. So I think just being open to different entry points can really make a difference. And then if we're doing that well, that ripple effect starts to happen upwards, downwards, left, right, centre. There's many companies that we've worked with where we've spoken with kind of like mid-level management, and then they've then championed it within their business, and then their senior leadership get on team for much deeper interventions. So I think there's so many ways around it, and sometimes we can get hung up on the idea of it has to be leadership, otherwise it's not going to work. And from what we've learned a lot with the people that we work with in our business, but it's particularly from the Wellbeing Leaders Mastermind, is that HR are feeling like it's kind of on their shoulders. They feel deflated when leadership are not on board, and then they don't feel empowered to make changes that they want to. So that's really then, okay, how do we give them the skills so where they can go and infiltrate leadership and kind of the target like the core problems that the organisation actually needs?
I think there's a redefinition needed for the word leader too, because we're talking about we're using the word leader interchangeably with manager, which is incorrect in my opinion. And so in reality, you can lead from within, like leader pushes for change, a manager manages complexity, right? Like we're not actually talking about a manager. We're talking about somebody exhibiting certain behaviors to go and actually say, hey, this is how I think we should act now. And then people look around and go, oh, that person's doing that. And at first people might go, that's weird. But then they start going, oh, actually, that makes sense. And then they start following, right? And so it doesn't matter whether you're leading a team or at the top of the organizational chart. It just matters for, okay, what are we trying to affect? Which change are we trying to affect here? And I'm going to keep going towards that. I think that's important.
Yeah. So what do you think, Sarah, about what Charlotte was just alluding to then in terms of HR's involvement?
I 100% agree. I mean, when I was working in corporate, and even now in my fractional work that I do with different entities, it's quite difficult sometimes to express changes within the environment. You can see things going wrong. You know why things are going wrong, but people won't support you in helping it to improve it. And you try and put different programs in place. You're talking from simple stuff like employee recognition and what have you, to change attitudes, change behaviours, to do recognition, to try and drive a different conversation, if you like. But it's your HR. You just do the hiring and firing. And a lot of it depends on the, I want to say, maturity of the business, as well as the attitude and ethics, and somewhere definitely the cultural element of the people who are the decision makers. I'm not going to call the leaders of the business, but the decision makers of the business. Because I think, everybody does, as you said, lead by title, right? I'm a manager, therefore I'm a leader. And it's like, no, you're not. You're just a manager. You manage and you are responsible for, a line in the profit and loss, and you're responsible for the budget, and you're responsible for this, that, and the other. But are you actually a leader? Well, that's questionable, And I think that's something that needs to be more carefully defined within businesses. And even when the new acronyms that are around at the moment for SLT and ELT, and it's like
I prefer BLT.
Yes.
Are we talking about a sandwich or something else? Okay, so I was like, I've not heard this one unless we're talking about the sandwich. Okay,
BLTs all the way, absolutely. Haram BLTs as well. But so you've got all of these acronyms coming in, so people are, I'm this, and it automatically inflates people's opinions of themselves, and somewhat translates a certain authority to people that maybe they shouldn't really have yet, and need that coaching. So there's a whole minefield there for HR to get across, and I'm a leader, so I should have this title. And what I find really funny as well, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, in companies who, when you're talking about job titles, and you've got heads of this, and you've got managers, and you've got directors, and everything gets a little bit grey and mushy, because you don't quite know which one's more senior than the other, and but head of sounds better, and director is this, and I'm like, it doesn't really matter. It's just the name of something, whether it's purple, blue, or green. It doesn't really matter. It's what the person does. And then you get into people who have a lead. I'm the lead, like call center manager. I'm the lead, when it actually means supervisor, and that kind of thing. So it kind of detracts from leadership in the business, I think. Like actual leadership in the business, and the people that do lead get lost. Because
it gets confused with expectations as well, right? It's like there are many managers in place, but they're expected to lead. Like you said, they might not have the skill set to, but so they're now feeling like I have to lead. I need to go and figure that out, and then they're neglecting perhaps some other skill sets that need some attention.
And it's also what people think leadership is, rather than what leadership actually is. And again, cultural. It comes back to the cultural aspect of, in certain cultures, a leader is a represent. If we think about some cultures that we work with, and people who would be put on a pedestal, if you like, as being, oh, he's a good leader. Okay, and we won't talk about people on the other side of the pond at the moment. But think about maybe from the subcontinent as who was a good leader, and putting those names forward. Well, actually, were they a good leader in maybe in that context? But if you put them into another context, is that leadership style a good representation or a good model to use?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that what a good leader looks like is very culturally contextual in terms of what I believe a good leader looks like is entirely different to somebody that comes from a different culture. So I suppose maybe you can tell us a bit more about how do you handle that with the work that you do, because Dubai is such a multicultural place. So you are definitely always going to be having people that you're dealing with that are leaders that are from different cultures, and their view of a suitable approach for leading might be different to what you might think.
I suppose there's some nuances, but I actually was speaking to 60 12-year-olds this morning.
Excellent.
Okay.
With Beth.
Yes.
And that was incredible because kids just tell it like it is, don't they? They don't mince words. And things like kindness and making sure there's gender equality were top of the list for them without me prompting them. Mm-hmm. And it was just a really nice way to kind of, it was a lovely thing to do, but also just to hear these things, which, as I say, there's no sugarcoating. Kindness, empathy. I want to make sure that I help people. I want to make sure that people can succeed. I want to make sure that women can because we talked about Malala Yousafzai, and that for me, I don't think, I think, yes, there's cultural nuances.
Yeah.
But I think there is some hardwired bits in there, right?
That makes a good leader.
Yeah, and it's about holding space. It's about being kind. It's about creating space for others to thrive. And I think that would be fairly common across all cultures.
Yeah.
But what we see a lot here, is this pace-setting style of leadership, right? Which is follow me. Well, follow me and keep up is what I should say. And if you don't keep up, then you're not good enough. When in reality, everybody's got got different working styles, right? And so it's not necessarily the best leadership style. It's not. There are causes for it. There are causes for all of them when you look at it. But that's certainly what I see a lot here. Is it's cool, it's fast, it's good, let's go. Like, what was the question? Don't worry, just go. And it's like, okay, and you see these people who are kind of like deer in headlights and exhausted, which is where the well-being piece comes in, of just overwork. I have to keep up with this kind of manager who is just pushing me to the brink because that's what they've learned. And I think that's the thing we can try and do a little bit less of here, is moving so quickly and just pulling it back a bit.
Because that's almost self-perpetuating as well, isn't it?
Correct.
Because, people learn this from a manager and then go, oh, that's the right way to do it, because
correct.
that then gets rewarded or they get promoted. And then it gets, they continue to do the same thing. And that is a hard nut to crack.
Yeah. Because then people get stuck, not only in that state from what they're like in that cycle of kind of just copy and pasting what the boss does and says. It's like their neurology and their physiology is literally now getting stuck in these fight or flight modes.
Yeah.
And then we're reacting in ways that perhaps we never would ever dream of reacting. So even though those core fundamentals are there, like kindness, empathy, and so on, I think how we do that is heavily affected by then the state that we can show up in when we're in that space, right?
So I think if we talk about the fight or flight status, for example, and this is something that I think a lot of people, when we talk about burnout in entrepreneur circles, everyone, burnout, and that's a new buzzword as well at the moment. Don't get me wrong, I've not faced it, and I can't imagine I wouldn't like to, and it is a real thing, but it is something that a lot of people are now speaking up and being more vocal about, but nobody's really talking about the same behavior or psychological state in the workplace. It's sort of solely parked for, if you're an entrepreneur, you can have burnout. If you're a corporate employee, you're not allowed to do that. That's not part of the gig. But people do. And I know myself, I've been through that and had, for myself, my health was been appalling for years because of it. how what are the sort of other signs and symptoms of these things, and what can it do to you? Because there's cortisol and God knows what other hormonal elements going on. I think it's not just about the soft and fluffiness, but it's worth flagging up and bringing up to the core to make people realise.
Oh, 100%. I mean, my personal experience of burnout happened in the workplace. And I was in a senior level position. I was flying around all these different countries in GCC, responsible for thousands of employees in different kind of facets within the business. And nobody talked about burnout. I was in the health and wellness space, right? And they weren't talking about it, but people were flaking out left, right, and centre, but nobody was calling it out. And for me in that position, around that environment, it was actually even more toxic, which led to then that lack of psychological safety to be able to speak up about things. And symptoms, just from my personal experience, was being a lot more reactive than what I would have been before, constantly on, overworking all of the time, feeling like I needed to be there. Definitely spiraling thoughts, suicidal ideation. It got quite extreme, emotional eating, had to completely bail out. And it was something that I would never wish upon anyone. The clients we work with, the coaching side of our business, we see all sorts of things like perfectionism coming and rising to the surface, overspilling into personal relationships as well. People they're wanting to stay at work to avoid being at home, people wanting to stay and do the opposite. And it's like these extreme scenarios all typically come down to avoidance tendencies or anxious tendencies, or a combination of both. And if we start to see those patterns within ourselves, we need to be able to feel safe enough to speak up about it. But ultimately, we need to have an awareness of what the individual might be going through, even if they don't actually say it or share it. Like, what behaviors are changing? So rather than looking at, maybe they're a bit more negative or a lot more kind of critical lately, what is the change in behavior? What was their norm and what's shifted? Because they might actually go the other end of the spectrum, might be happy, right, all of the time. Yeah. And that's a common thing that we see. And it's like, well, it's a shock when then they just, crumble. So it's like being aware of the changes within their existing patterns. I think that's probably the key to look for, rather than to look for something specific.
Yeah. There's I think something to be aware of is the different levels of burnout, right? Like, it's not just you show up one day and then the next day you burned out. There's a progression. And I think there's 6 stages. I was talking with a friend of mine about this, this is what she does. 6 stages, right? And so number 6 is you're not getting out of bed kind of thing. And most of us don't get there, but many of us operate on kind of 3 or 4 all of the time. I got to 5 last year, which was pretty bad. I got to New Zealand and was very sick and took 7 weeks off. We don't understand that we're kind of operating in that space. And I mean, you're absolutely right to call out the entrepreneur thing, because it's like a badge of honor for entrepreneurs. But then, absolutely, in the workplace, people are just kind of going about their thing. It's like, well, that's just how we operate. How has that happened?
Yeah.
We've gotten to a stage where literally you're saying, you're going to be operating kind of at a 3 or 4 burnout, and that's okay with us.
Yes, and we condone that. Yeah. You have a bonus for doing it. If you get to stage 5, you'll get some more.
What we're also seeing though is that then people will resign and become entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Right? That is the new pattern that we're seeing across the board.
Yeah.
It's like, oh well, I need that time freedom so that I can relax and
so I can burn myself out properly.
People don't realise
how proud of it.
It's full circle. Let's go back into corporate. It's literally what's happening in front of our eyes, particularly in this region.
Yeah.
So you both have independently developed your own models that are specific to the 2 areas that you work in, wellbeing for you, Charlotte, and leadership development for you, Sam. So I thought it'd be helpful for us to kind of just dive into those a little bit more in terms of Charlotte, if you can tell us a bit about your model and how that kind of drives the right culture in the workplace. And then, Sam, you can talk to us about how and what does that look like in terms of being a leader. Cool. So
it kind of brings us back to the very first question around well-washing, because ultimately, we've had this narrative for a long time. You've heard it before. If you're on LinkedIn, you've definitely seen it everywhere with the whole yoga and fruit bowls and that not working. So this model kind of came around, was like, hey, how do we shift that perspective? And what does that actually look like? So if you can visualize an infinity sign, and on one side you've got...
I can, because it's my brand.
Exactly, right? It's
Love how these things are thrown together.
Just check the logo and you'll see. So on the imagine on one side of it you've got workplace wellbeing, and the other side you've got employee wellness, and often they're used interchangeably. And I think what we need to understand is actually they both work together. Hence the infinity symbol, right? Is that it is an ecosystem. It is what we call the well-working ecosystem, which looks at things like leadership, cultural intelligence. It looks at things like what benefits and perks do you have, what's the communication, and then on the employee wellness side, then we've got quality of thinking, nutrition, movement, sleep, and we've got all these other different factors. And the idea is to really start to look at what levers are pulling which ones. We have like an employee wellness assessment that we do with organizations that we work with, and we kind of do that to actually show them what's wrong in the workplace, because we're like, okay, this is how people are scoring. Obviously it's all anonymized, but the consensus of what comes back is actually, well, it's being stuck at work all the time that's causing this. It's nothing to do with whether the person can take deep breaths or meditate or not. And often what we've seen is leaders need to see that in black and white when they're actually measuring for something else, and then actually can see black and white, okay, well, this is actually what the problem is. It doesn't make any sense for me to spend money on this workshop, that workshop. It makes sense for us to actually invest in some of these actual core issues. And it kind of just helps open people's eyes to the different way and to zoom out and look at well-being as a whole. Because we get siloed in. It happens in departments, in organisations, but it's also happening when we look at well-being, and it's creating more problems than it is solutions. Yeah. So by having this integrated approach, it helps us to be able to actually say, oh, okay, well, actually, this over here is affecting my ability to emotionally regulate myself. It's not because I don't know how. It's because I'm constantly being triggered from this, or my nervous system is wired and I can't do it because I'm constantly in this state because of these unrealistic deadlines or whatever it is. So the well-working ecosystem really is like a visual representation of how these items work together and how can we actually start to use our resources more efficiently, whether that be money, time, skill sets, whatever that is. You know, most things in wellbeing don't cost you any money, right? And when I tell people that, they're like, but that's what you do for a living. I'm like, I know, but I shouldn't have to, right? Because ultimately, your event today was amazing. I'm not sure when this goes out, but obviously you had your HR and CQ event today, and it was awesome. And a lot of the things we talked about were free interventions. They're things that you can do like for 30 days, absolutely free, no budget. There's so many things like that we can do if we're looking in the right place. But I feel like we typically just like, oh, okay, well, that looks good on LinkedIn. They did this workshop. I'm going to go and do that workshop. Or I'm going to look on Instagram and like, this looks fun. Let's go and do that. And it's like, oh, now we're just scratching the surface. We might make like 1% shift for maybe 1% of the people that show. If we look at the root cause of the issue, we're going to make longer term results.
Yeah, and I really like that personally, because I think that one of the things that's kind of missed in the wellbeing space in the region is that, you know, we can't just resolve these issues with sound bowl and meditation and things, because actually for some people that's not culturally appropriate. Exactly. You know, it doesn't fit with their faith. It's not something that they want to be involved with. So actually let's be looking at other things, like how can we handle or tackle some of the issues in the well-being of our employees outside of some of the other approaches that I see in this region. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's also like it highlights the need that it's a shared responsibility.
Yes.
It's not just on HR or the workplace. It's not just on the employee to stay well. Actually, we need to figure out what's that middle ground.
Definitely.
And I feel like either HR puts it on their shoulders, I'm responsible for everyone's well-being, or the individual does. Typically, those employees that are experiencing the presenteeism and burnout, same things happen. And we see it with leaders all the time.
Good segue.
Nice segue into Sam's leadership module.
So we have a model which is a little more linear, but it's about creating the environment for success. And we start with actually building psychological safety. So that's a big passion of mine. And then actually with that, I mean, the most important thing with psychological safety is that you can then disagree. So we teach people how to argue, basically, or to.
Excellent. I need to be there.
We need to go on this one, Sarah, don't we?
It's so much fun. People are scared of it, right? People are scared of disagreeing in the workplace and scared of disagreeing with, particularly here. I've seen. I mean, this is quite a hierarchical culture, similar to the Japanese. I mean, I'm from a culture which is so egalitarian, it's not even funny. Basically you meet somebody and within 30 seconds you're calling them mate, and that's the highest guy in the organization or girl. What a catch. We start with that in terms of, okay, how do we create this environment of psychological safety where people can speak up? Then what we do is look at, okay, and this is when we're looking specifically with a team or leaders, is why do you exist? What are you actually doing? What sort of identity you want? And from there, everything falls out in terms of, okay, how are you going to behave? What values does that mean you're going to espouse? So ours is very much the how of, okay, so you've looked at where your shortcomings may be in the well-being of your workplace with Charlotte's, and then we look at it and go, okay, so what's the environment you need to actually succeed? And so we spend a lot of time with people who they think they're getting some training or some coaching, and then what happens is, it's interesting because you'll start this program and you start this movement in the organization, and people go, oh, this isn't good enough. We want things to be done this way. This is what we would like. And so whether it's the people at the top or the bottom, whatever, there's this movement starting. And then there's these conversations which go on in the organization. And I'm a bit of a fire starter. Like that's what happens is we go into these conversations, these organizations, and the next thing you know, they're all going, we need more of this, and it needs to be up there, and we need to do different things differently, and we want to be more explicit about how we're going to behave in the workplace. And it works. There's this kind of movement starts where you've got, it's top down, bottom up, oscillating between the two. And that's the, what our model brings about. So basically, our model brings about chaos. But
we love a bit of chaos.
Yeah.
So we've had some fantastic conversations this afternoon. Unfortunately, we have to bring it to a close.
Yep.
These things always go past faster than you think, right? And I just want to say thank you so much. It was great to learn about your businesses and what you do. And I think we could have a much longer conversation in the future. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you for having us.